Let's talk about imperialism. Before we begin actually getting into the material, make sure that you've downloaded the worksheet so that you either have it printed out, ready to go in front of you, or you have it somewhere on your computer that you'll be able to type in your answers as we go. Okay, so you've actually seen imperialism before, and we're just getting into it regarding the 19th century. So I've gone to the Regents Prep website. They do a great job giving you an introduction into 19th century imperialism. But here's the big idea. Imperialism is when a stronger nation takes over or dominates a weaker nation. That's the big idea. They have a lot of different motivations, but as long as you have that information, you'll be good to go. So on that first question on the worksheet, those fill-in notes, you can just point to this first sentence. So imperialism occurs when a strong nation takes over a weaker nation or region and dominates its economic, political, or cultural life. So that's number one. The second question is asking you about what nations would experience prior to industrialization. So let's go to that second little paragraph there. So this type of foreign policy was practiced by European nations and Japan throughout the 1800s and early 1900s. In every case, a nation would experience industrialization prior to practicing imperialism on a foreign nation or region. This was due to the nearly insatiable demand for cheap raw materials and the need for markets to buy manufactured goods. Okay, so let's go to number 3. What is needed to maintain an industrialized economy? Abundant raw materials and vast markets are needed in order to maintain an industrialized economy. So you should have 2 items there. Raw materials such as iron and cotton can be turned into products such as steel and textiles. Finally, these products need to be sold to a market in order to realize a profit. Okay, so now that you get the idea, I'm just going to continue reading through the text and you can just pull from it the material that you need to answer the questions. So the forces of industrialization caused nations to begin looking outside of their borders for cheaper and more abundant raw materials. Foreign populations were also viewed as vast markets where goods produced in domestic factories could be sold. There are other causes. For example, nationalism, or pride in one's country, also contributed to the growth of imperialism. Citizens were proud of their country's accomplishments, which sometimes included taking over foreign areas. As European nations became competitive with one another, there was an increased pressure to practice imperialism in order to maintain a balance of power in Europe. Okay, so picture that you have all these different European countries that are battling one another for who can end up with the most land. So they're going into Africa, they're going into Southeast Asia, they're going into Latin America, all these places that they think they can dominate so that they can basically compete on who can have the most. So something else that motivated imperialists was something called the white man's burden. So as Europeans took over foreign lands, they viewed the culture of the native population to be inferior to their own. This concept became known as the white man's burden after a popular poem by the same name was published by Rudyard Kipling in 1899. Some interpreted this poem to mean that it was the duty of imperializing nations to bring Western culture and sensibility to the savage native populations, as they were called, that were encountered in far-off lands. This is sometimes referred to as social Darwinism, or the belief that all human groups compete for survival, and that the stronger groups will replace the weaker groups. Others saw it as a warning to Western nations to stop the harmful practice of imperialism. So what that means is Rudyard Kipling came out with this poem talking about how there was this belief in Europe that white European, specifically men, sometimes women, it was their Christian duty to help the, quote, savages of other nations become more like them. It was their job. It was the right thing to do. Other people saw the poem as being sarcastic and actually kind of condemning that belief, kind of making fun of it. So you'll have a chance to look at it and see what you think. Okay, so here are the 4 basic motives or causes of imperialism. So you have economic motives, you have nationalism, you have the balance of power, and white man's burden. So I'm just going to leave this up for a minute You can take the time to just copy it down right into the box that you have. So if you need more time, just press pause. Okay, so the results of imperialism during the 19th century. So in the short term, imperialism was a very profitable foreign policy, which came at the expense of the foreign regions where it was being practiced. Cultural diffusion also occurred, meaning that, so for example, if Britain went into foreign land, their culture would start spreading through the people there as well. So that also occurred, leading to an exchange of ideas between the West and the East, so that's good. For example, European methods of education were adopted, leading foreigners to study ideas of liberty and democracy embraced during the Enlightenment and various political revolutions. So this article is saying that the idea of democracy kind of came from imperialists, which is kind of funny, that it ended up coming from them into the lands where they were dominating. So that becomes important. So this exchange eventually led to the demise of imperialism and colonialism throughout the world after World War II, which we're going to talk about a little bit later in the year. So at this point, all of your fill-in notes should be complete. If you need to go back and re-listen or re-look at something, just feel free and go ahead. You can also go into a search engine like Google, and if you just type in Regents Prep Imperialism, you'll probably come up with that same article, so you'll be good to go. Okay, so from this lesson, you'll need two major pieces from it. So number one would be the definition of imperialism, and we can even simplify it. So if I were to ask you what is imperialism, the answer that I'd be looking for is imperialism is when a stronger nation takes over a weaker nation. If you just have that, I'm fine with that. That'll work. And then the second thing is going to be the causes, the motivations, what starts the want for imperialism or the need for imperialism. So we have the four major causes, and I kind of put them in the acronym. I do new BP because it's easier for me to remember. So if that works for you, great. So you've got nationalism, economy or economic motives, either would be fine. The W is going to be white man's burden, and then you've got BP, which is your balance of power. So hopefully that little acronym will work out for you the same way that it does for me.